Okay, it is exactly 8:30 p.m. Central Standard Time, and welcome to week number 6. Week number 6. This is the final lecture for this course, and the course will absolutely end this Tuesday, the 10th, at 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. So you want to make sure you get all assignments in and completed by that time in order to get credit. Anything after that, you will not be able to have graded. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. Okay. And okay. So now they've made some changes to this already. So this is the student view. And you can see now that they have actually changed some of the settings. So starting with, let's see, the messages. These are from week 5, the one I sent out the 2 days ago, and the rest of the messages. This is your grade book. And at week 6, you see we have rehabilitation is your written assignment, and discussion is your rehabilitation improvements, and then your live lecture, which I will give you today, the key phrase. And then you notice that all 3 are due on Tuesday, the 10th, every single one of them. So let's take a look at the assignment rehabilitation and the requirements for that. Okay, so you're going to read this blurb here. So some say that it's almost impossible to rehabilitate an offender and make them into a protective citizen within the confines of a prison. Yet evidence-based practices are emerging that prove that this can be accomplished. I say amen and agree to that. So you're going to conduct research using resources from this module as well as the library that we have, and view some of the current techniques being used to treat mental illness, addiction, lack of education, and other problems within the prison system. And 2, if possible, which I doubt it, conduct a personal interview with a warden, prison administrator, or prison official. Don't worry about that. You will not be held to that standard if you cannot do it. Don't worry about it. You hear me already? You will not lose points for that. Then develop 2 additional methods by which you think rehabilitation can be accomplished within a prison with resources from the community for nonviolent offenders. And then completing in a 2 to 3 page paper, 2 to 3 pages, discuss the current techniques being used by the prison you contacted or researched, as well as 2 additional ideas to accomplish rehabilitation within the prison, dealing with also mental illness, addiction, lack of education, and other problems. Be sure the procedures or practices are feasible. Do not require an increase in funding or corrections manpower. APA, which means it's double space, citations in the body, referencing in. If you interviewed someone, name that person and where they work, as well as other resources that you use. Your paper should include in-text citations and a reference page, as well as the cover page. You already know that. And then this is to help you with APA. The document is to be submitted in Microsoft Word. If you submit it in any other form, I can't help you because it's not going to be graded and you're going to get a 0 for it. That's the assignment. You should be able to do this pretty easily. Okay, I'm going to show you the rubric in just a minute. But first, let's look at the discussion post. And you're going to deal with the directions here. And you have 2 examples: St. Cloud, Department of Corrections, Demographics, and Philadelphia. Okay, so in your initial post, you're going to follow this. In your reply post, respond to someone's initial post whose suggestions are how the prison could improve their efforts to rehabilitate. Okay, make sure that you can have references or citations if you want, no problem there. Remember, they both are due by Tuesday, the 10th. All right. And then, of course, your live classroom lecture phrase. Okay, so now let's come out of this. Let's go back. All right, so let's look at the assignment and the rubric itself specifically. And here you are. Okay, so you're going to deal with the issues of mastery. Remember, that's the column. And notice that if you don't have citations or references, you're not clear on describing the information, the examination of current techniques, you will end up over here, over here, over here. Same with discussion of the techniques and discussions of the ideas. Remember, APA is the requirement. So remind you again to ignore this, ignore this, ignore this. Focus on this column. Okay. All right, so now that's your assignment. You already know about the discussions. So there you go right there. Rehabilitation improvements. Let's take a look at the course calendar. Okay. And here's the month view. You can see this is where we are. We are right here, the live lecture. And remember this. You know, you can disregard this, but this is week 6. And remember, the assignments are due on the 10th. That's when the course ends, on the 10th, not the 11th, not the 12th, or anything. Very important for you to note that, because on Wednesday the 11th, the next course starts. Okay, let's go back to the content. Oh, before we do that, I want to show you this. Your announcement for this week. I thought I had put it up. Okay. I thought I had put it up, but I will put it up right after this, and you'll be able to see it. But I thought for sure that I did put it up, but I will give it to you. But you already know what the announcement says. It talks about the written assignment, and it talks about the written assignment here. Rehabilitation, which is due the 10th. Your discussion posts are due on the 10th. And then your live classroom lecture date is due on the 10th as well. So it's pretty straightforward. Even if you don't look at that, you're aware of it from the calendar that I just shared with you. So now let's talk about sentencing and correctional philosophies. Okay. And so the philosophy of corrections practice is ultimately to achieve rehabilitation, retribution, deterrence, and incapacitation. Now, during the early periods, um, we didn't focus as much on rehabilitation. You must understand that each of these goals or philosophies is to treat the cause of criminal behavior. As I've said over and over and over again, to be able to take individuals in a new direction, turn them around. Says rehabilitative efforts seek to change the thinking pattern. That's what I was been saying all this whole course and other courses, corrections as well as other courses that I teach. Thinking pattern, how the offender thinks, not to have them to reoffend or become recidivists. And so during the first 70 years, we began to focus on rehabilitative knowledge. It is, as it says, scholars point out that 50 years ago, during the time of indeterminate sentencing, judges had wide discretion to sentencing, and correction authorities could release inmates when they felt the person was rehabilitated. And so they focused it on how the person appeared to be operating. The philosophy at that time was that criminal behavior occurred because of something like harsh slum environmental conditions under which some children were raised as to why they offended. Yeah, that's generally par for the course, but there are many, many, many exceptions. I stand here raising my hand as one of those exceptions because if you know my story for adversity is the springboard to success, you know that I had some pretty serious challenges in my childhood. And so it is sometimes overrated as to how and why a person ended up in the condition that they were in. The dysfunctional environment which many offenders was raised caused psychological damage, which corrections was obligated to correct. Again, I do understand what they're saying, but I don't use that as a basis for not being able to successfully rehabilitate an individual. I think at all costs, we need to focus on rehabilitation. Okay. The early philosophy dictated that all levels of correction should operate using strict procedural guidelines. That is to determine when a person was coming back out into the community, how they were being prepared, when the inmate received opportunities for educational and vocational training, which is constantly advocated by me, and probation and parole officers were highly trained to be able to deal with these issues, such as education. I talked about or shared with some of you before in other classes, a program that I worked with as an attorney through one of the judges, R. Eugene Pencham, called Probation Challenge, that when an individual came before him, this was in Illinois, and the individual had a nonviolent offense and qualified for probation, and if the individual had not received a GED, a general educational diploma, then the person was given an opportunity to um, work in this program called Probation Challenge. And if they completed successfully and obtained a GED, came back before the judge, then the case would be dismissed. And it was demonstrated that those individuals who completed that program oftentimes went on to four-year institutions, and at least one person I know actually became a lawyer. So it's important to understand that education is so important, and one of the key conduits to rehabilitation for people who don't have drug problems or alcohol problems or mental illness problems, which that's a whole nother setup. And so during the 60s, um, uh, individual rights came about where mandatory rehabilitative treatment, education, and training was required under the federal and state governments. Some people didn't like that, but I think that, again, that's the best because it decreased the return trips to prison and gave the person an opportunity to have a fresh start or to go in a totally new direction, i.e., taking them from 12 o'clock on the clock down to 6 o'clock and growing them from there and taking them to a new direction, doing what I refer to as a 180 to help the individual. So the government had some issues because the institutions couldn't prove that their efforts were deterring crime, and some people started to challenge those, and thus came the just desserts philosophy, which meant that individuals would get what was coming to them. In the 60s, there were disturbances, riots, all kinds of attacks, and so forth. And so the 70s ushered in crime control philosophy, where it was required by society to have more public safety from violence and criminal activity. So the government, once again, started to fall by the wayside. And I said, furthermore, observers who disliked the coercive nature of mandatory rehabilitation insisted that the judges have no discretion in sentencing and demanded that indeterminate sentence be eliminated and stricter sentencing guidelines. Now, the key thing is that when that took place, the individual had no incentive for changing their behavior. Judges had to follow the guidelines of the statutes, and since individual and civil rights were at the forefront during this time, groups fought against the mandate to rehabilitate inmates. And this resulted in mass incarceration, extended prison, jail times, and lack of rehabilitation philosophy that we are under right now. So there's still that battle going on to do so. And the battle brought about by the retributive philosophy, which we see today, based on just desserts. That is, you get what's coming to you. The punishment fits the crime, and the elimination of indiscriminate sentencing and rehabilitation. The escalating crime rates in the 60s and 70s focus on incapacitation in a way of deterring and restoring peace to a society that now feared crime. However, I'm one who believe, as I have said over and over again, that the thing that's going to work the most is changing the directions. Even if you do it in small numbers, at least an attempt is made to change the direction in life for those individuals. And I say this as a senior citizen, that I would prefer to have individuals educated than to be incarcerated. I prefer to have people treated for the issues that bring them there, such as drugs, alcohol, and mental illness, to be able to cure those individuals. After all, when a person goes to a hospital and they're sick with the flu or whatever, COVID, you treat them. You don't want to keep them any longer than you have to, but you want to get them back to the stage they were before those things happened. Well, that's the same philosophy I feel, and when it comes to rehabilitation. Okay, so that's a little bit about the sentencing and correction philosophies. I think that you're going to find that in the long run, that we're going to be better off by not abandoning the rehabilitation process. So evidence-based practices, which we've talked about in the last few weeks, we talked about them the other day, says based on the practices, all correction personnel, from wardens down to the correction officers, can team up to help rehabilitate a prisoner. It is no longer viewed as simply places to house those who break the law. Current expectations are that prisons must prepare inmates to return to society and not to reoffend. That's exactly my philosophy and position. The National Institute of Correction says the evidence-based practices such as the objective, balanced, and responsible use of current research, and the best available data to guide the policies and practices, such that outcomes for consumers are improved. And so it should used originally for healthcare and social sciences field. Evidence-based practice focuses on demonstrated through effective empirical research rather than through anecdote or professional experience alone. So one of the first approaches currently used in the federal facility is to start on day one. Does that sound like something that you've heard before? I've said that from the first time that you come in contact with individuals, the role should be to begin to point that person in a new direction. Not just lock them up, throw away the key, but give them a new approach to life that will decrease the chances of them becoming recidivists. And you know, and I know that recidivism creates the big, huge problem that we have of crowded prisons. And when people are in situations where there's overcrowding, they're less likely to succeed. This refers to as the Pell Grant, which many of you probably heard of for education, provides funding for prisoners to complete their education while they're incarcerated. In 1994, Bill Clinton, president, in effort to control rising crime rates passed the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, which questioned the legitimacy of providing grant money. So the Pell Grant was discontinued under then President Clinton. New educational disciplines are being introduced to ensure exiting prisoners have skills to bring them back. And I think that, again, I was kind of surprised when that happened, because of the fact that some people looked at it as rewarding individuals for crime. I wouldn't look at it that way. I looked at it as a tool to try to ward off recidivism. And so now programs that prioritize mental health treatment came about in 2014 to help individuals. Substance abuse programs, for residential drug abuse programs to help inmates as they transition back in the community to ensure success. So I say amen to those things, because that's exactly where I find myself in dealing with individuals, from the standpoint as a lawyer, as well as a police officer when I was. Recent incentives recognize the value of the family. Very important. So it's important that there be strong family ties. Individuals who have some kind of accountability source, who that represent a positive, not a negative example, will be able to successfully operate as a rehabilitated person. Another effort is to use halfway houses and other forms where individuals go through these processes. It's like a midway between the prison or the jail and being free. Some of these instances not only using halfway houses, where there's further programming provided to address the issues of the individuals to achieve success after release. There's also home monitoring, which is utilized where individuals can. And now with the advent, and it's not in here, but now with the advent of internet, that you can get an education and still be under house arrest and be able to achieve success. So the last thing is inmates need to have the ability to make a living, housing, and school. In order to do this, identification is needed. Programs that help individuals to receive proper ID, such as Social Security cards, birth certificates, driver's license, state IDs, and things of that nature. So it is important for you to understand that. Some people take that for granted, but it is so necessary. You'll be surprised at people who have been in the system. They don't have a birth certificate. They don't even have a Social Security card, which now is used more than it was before, and some form of identification like a state ID to identify those individuals. So those are the things. So in other words, so the individuals are given the opportunity. There are many jurisdictions now who are now restoring the right of those individuals to vote, to be able to continue to contribute towards turning them into productive citizens as well. So these are just some of the evidence-based things as well. Finally, the best practices dealing with evidence-based, what is very cost-effective, and based on for the highest risk and the highest need inmates. There are 3 challenges. We've talked about these before, but I'll conclude by sharing that number 1, the correctional institution will fall short in adhering to the key principles for reducing recidivism, and does not effectively use all of its program slots despite wait lists. And there is a form of measuring that's flawed. So to correct those issues, funding, number 1, is necessary from the government agencies to provide the ability for these programs to show which rehabilitative programs are evidence-based and must be evaluated regularly to determine how effective they are in reducing recidivism. It's a slow process. It's a slow process. Independent researchers must continually evaluate the cost effectiveness of the programs. Number 3, a review committee must be in place to review which offenders are considered highest risk and need and how the programs will address those needs. So number 4, correctional facilities must improve the use of its current rehabilitation programs. Doesn't do any good to say we have them and don't use them. And then finally, number 5, improve performance by requiring consistent oversight of those programs, improving rehabilitation. Okay. Finally, one method of evaluating the risk of recidivism is to recognize the criminogenic factors contributing to criminal behavior. The following factors should be addressed to show those who are most likely to reoffend. Here they are, and they fit right into what we've been talking about. Antisocial behavior, personality, relationship, criminal thinking, poor family relationships, low or poor schoolwork performance, problems with drug or alcohol abuse. So these issues show that things must be addressed. Must. The benefits of successful rehabilitation of inmates is a win-win situation for all. This is like I could have written this. Society is happy as crime rates decrease and states save money because it's more expensive to incarcerate. And there is the reduced cost of public assistance as well, helping offenders with their educational employment opportunities, second chance programs. Yet one of the biggest advantages to inmate rehabilitation cannot be measured in dollar amounts, but rather in the safety of the inmate and correction officers, as educated, treated inmates are less likely to be violent, making managing the population safer for everyone. And on that note, I say it is very important to remember that. So now this module, this week, we have dealt with the issue of one of my favorite topics, rehabilitation. Very important for you to recognize and understand that of all the goals that are set forth, operating rehabilitation, remember reintegration is getting you back into the community. Rehabilitation is bringing you back into that reintegration with a change direction, going in a new direction, such as repeating again from 12 o'clock to 6, doing a 180. And then constantly repeating over and over and over programs, ideas to meet the needs of each of those individual inmates on a case-by-case basis, so that we decrease the prison population one prisoner at a time. It's a lot of people want microwave, boom, instant results, but it's just like, as I talked about the other night, planting an apple tree. It takes time. You have to be patient, but continue to work the system to be able to nurture them. That's what those individuals need to take them in new directions. And that comes in the form of second chance programs, education, opportunities for housing, things to raise their self-esteem. The opportunity and ability to be able to vote is a good thing as well. And then addressing, of course, the core needs of drugs and alcohol and mental illness. And we get to the battle of dealing with those, we'll be on our way to rehabilitation and decreasing the need for more prisons. Well, it's been a great quarter. I hope that you've learned something. I hope I see many of you go for your bachelor's, and looking forward to seeing you down the road. Oh yeah, I have to give you a key phrase. You can probably guess what it is this time. It's the topic that we discussed for the last half an hour or so: rehabilitation. Let's not abandon it. Let's encourage it. Let's increase it. Let's work that plan and plan that work. I remember at a church I used to attend, there was a big sign that says, fail to plan, plan to fail. Plan your work and then work your plan. Rehabilitation is the way. See ya in the future. Stay safe. Take care of yourself. Good night.